I would like now to introduce our keynote speaker for the Combining Accounting Skills with Information Technology session, Jeff Mueller. Jeff is the Wisconsin Governance, Risk, and Compliance Practice Leader within the Business Advisory Services Group at Grant Thornton. Jeff brings over 22 years of experience spanning both risk management and finance across multiple industry verticals. His background includes internal audit, multiple lead roles overseeing Sarbanes-Oxley compliance for multi-billion-dollar international clients, risk assessment, development and execution, fraud monitoring platform development, leading risks and controls teams for major systems implementations and enterprise risk management facilitation and program builds. Mueller is a UW-Milwaukee graduate, began his career with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and also served in roles with Northwestern Mutual and Rockwell Automation. Prior to joining Grant Thornton, Jeff held the role of Vice President and National Practice Director of Risk Management Services at Titus, which is a niche Midwest-based risk management firm. Please join me in welcoming Jeff.
Thank you. So before I get started, I wanted to add a little bit more to my background. Growing up, both my parents were teachers, so I have a very keen appreciation for this group. My dad was the math chair at Kettle Moraine High for many years, and my mother was she was a second grade teacher in the Mukwonago School District. So I have a very keen awareness of some of the things that you all go through on a daily basis, and really appreciate what it is you do and how you're molding the future of our children. So thank you very much. So I guess before I get started, a question that I have, this is an accounting group. I'm just curious as to how many of you have had experience within risk management in some capacity, not just core technical accounting, but if you could just raise your hands if you have been in the risk management space. Okay, so that's pretty low numbers. It was interesting when I was asked to come in and speak this morning. I was giving some consideration to, okay, how do I fit in, and what's going to be a topic that's going to be very relevant. And I think something that oftentimes isn't appreciated is the fact that accounting is really fundamental to not just going in and maintaining the books, doing debits and credits, but much beyond that. It sets the foundation for a lot of other different aspects that individuals can get involved with. So myself, I started on the audit side, so I was very accounting centric when I came out of school, and from there I migrated through a number of different roles within financial planning and analysis, different risk management types of roles, SOX, system implementation support. I've worked with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different sizes, and a lot of different capacities, and all of that has been grounded by my education and background in accounting. So it is an area that I think provides individuals a lot of different options, and and goes well beyond just some of the technical aspects that we're immersed in initially through the accounting programs. What I thought I would do today is develop a few of these concepts a bit more. So I'll start by giving a little bit of an overview of Grant Thornton, so where I sit within the organization and what our organization provides. I'll talk about accounting and IT interface. So one of the things that has really developed, I would say, over the last 10 to 15 years is this concept of you can't think of accounting and information technology as discrete types of processes. They have become very integrated. A lot of what I do now from a risk management side of the house, it pulls in accounting, it pulls in finance, it pulls in information technology, and we look at risk across organizations along a very large spectrum of different types of functional areas. I wanted to give you a sense of how we take some of these concepts, and a lot of these concepts are things that you're probably discussing on a day-to-day basis, and really apply them to organizations. So again, it's interesting in the risk management space as we've had different types of concepts and methodologies come into vogue over the past 10, 20 years. Oftentimes, there's a lot of starting and stopping, but as we've gotten into the information age, technology, the use of data, there are some really neat things that we're doing today that are applying these concepts very differently and much more efficiently than we have in the past. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And I wanted to make this relevant to this audience and how and what we look for in students that come into our organizations. So at Grant Thornton, and particularly in my space, I'm hiring experienced individuals with different types of expertise to complement what it is we do. And we also do a lot of hiring right off of campus. So within the public accounting space in general, there's a lot of competition for campus hires. And there's specific skill sets that I look for in particular that are very relevant. So I'll take you through that so you can have an appreciation for what it is I look for. And then if there are questions, I have that at the end, but please feel free at any point in this discussion, if you have a question, raise your hand or shout it out. I like this to be very interactive. Okay, this is kind of hard to see, but this is an overview of how we're structured at Grant Thornton. So a couple things to note. We do full audit, tax, and advisory services. I've blown out the advisory because that's where I reside. We're a global firm. We're in 160 countries, 40,000 staff. We have over $4 billion in revenues annually. So we provide a full range of accounting, audit, and advisory services. So within advisory, this is really the consulting space. We're broken down between risk advisory, transaction advisory, and business consulting and technology. So I continue to break down this risk advisory space because, again, that's where I sit. So underneath risk advisory, you can see we have further pieces: the controls advisory, strategic risk, compliance risk, operational risk, and cyber and third-party risk. So what's interesting in terms of how this structure breaks down, we are trying to cater to different types of needs across organizations, from strategic to operational types of risk needs. Underlying all this, we have a data analytics center of excellence. So one of the things that we see today is there's a huge need to get as much business intelligence from data as as organizations can possibly get. It provides a tremendous competitive advantage if you know how to use data very effectively. So across all of our advisory lines, we have a center of excellence that supports data analytics, and then we also have a quality group that makes sure we're delivering at an appropriate level of quality. So that's a little bit about Grant Thornton. I sit in this bucket right here, controls advisory, but sitting in this bucket doesn't mean that I do exclusively controls advisory work. So I actually work very extensively across all of our different advisory business lines, and I actually have a little bit of interface with the audit and tax side. There's less with the audit just because the AICPA rules and SEC rules around independence preclude us from working extensively with audit clients. So we interface, but we don't do a lot of work on clients that are audit clients for us. Does that make sense? Okay, so on this slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we begin getting from accounting to risk management, and specifically how that ties into this information technology hook. So fundamentally, where a lot of what we do starts is in the accounting space. So how do revenues get recorded? What are risks across revenue? Essentially, the accounting concepts are supported by processes within organizations. Those processes are supported by systems, which gets into information technology, and underlying all of that is data. These areas here really fall into the SOX realm. So I've done a fair amount of work within the SOX space over my career, and we're really looking at the core processes and technologies that support effective accounting, if you will, and appropriate reporting on the financial statements. So there's this fundamental linkage across across the processes, technologies, and data that tie right back to accounting. A couple things that probably are worth noting here. In today's day and age, a lot of the systems that we work on, the big SAP, Oracle types of systems, these are all built to accommodate accounting principles and embed key controls. So we do a lot of work today looking at how systems are configured, how they integrate into key processes, and how they're structured to ensure that there's appropriate recording from an accounting perspective. So again, these are all very integrated processes. They start with accounting principles, but again, they really then develop into processes and technologies that support those principles the right way. As I mentioned earlier, this data component is a really important concept. Data has always been something that organizations have been very, very focused on, and concepts around business intelligence. So how do you look at analytics? How do you look at data within the organization to potentially drive better financial performance? That's a concept that's been around a long time. But over the last 5 to 10 years, what has really emerged is the technology to support this the right way. So we talk a lot about big data, small data. How do you process all this information? And we do a lot of work with clients in terms of really trying to understand how we can take large blocks of information and drive them into very meaningful analysis that can help organizations run their organizations more effectively. So this data concept is really important, and driving business is very different today than it has previously. So again, linking accounting to information technology to data, these are all things that are very relevant. This next slide, I wanted to give everyone a sense of what we do relative to these concepts in terms of how we began applying them to real-world organizations. So this is a slide that I use with a lot of my clients when we're coming in and we're looking to really help them understand and begin thinking about how to organize thoughts around key risks within their organization and how effectively they manage those risks. So if you look at the top of this, coming down this middle column, we start with strategy and it flows down to data. So one of the things that we are always trying to do with organizations that we walk into is really understand what are your strategic objectives, what are the factors that are going to drive you to success. So we start by taking a look at strategy within organizations. That strategy is then manifested in strategic objectives. So what are the key objectives? Those objectives then are executed by functions within the organizations, and those functions have identified initiatives to execute on that strategy. So typically, to give you an example of how this works, most organizations we walk into, they will have strategic objectives in these spaces. So how do we drive revenues? How do we improve margin? SG&A improvement. There's sort of this top-line growth, and how do we become more efficient and effective across underlying processes to drive profitability improvement? So supporting these objectives, typically we have the finance function. This is a little tough to read, but we get into concepts around return on investment, cost and benefits, efficiency, and so forth. And finance is typically plugged into all of these types of objectives in some capacity. The initiatives that are designed to achieve strategic objectives are typically, these are examples of things that we typically see. So there's a lot of M&A activity. Our transaction advisory services group is heavily involved in this space as organizations are looking to potentially grow top line or improve their competitive position by an acquisition. We look at things, there's new product development happening every day in organizations, so we get plugged into those initiatives. Six Sigma and Lean, these are initiatives that drive efficiency within organizations. And then business process optimization. This is another very hot topic across organizations relative to how can we make our processes more efficient and more cost effective. How can we make our systems more efficient and effective? So the way that we begin thinking about this from a risk management perspective, we first want to, you can see I've got the risk management bucket here. And we want to begin by thinking a little bit about, what are the risks to achieving these objectives? So it's very interesting when you think about, okay, if we want to grow revenue, now what's going to preclude us from doing that? There may be regional types of issues. There could be underlying operational issues that may not allow us to achieve revenues based on the structure of the organization. So a lot of different things from a risk management perspective that we are, that we are very curious to understand and really evaluate with the organization whether or not they have assessed those risks the right way. So from a risk management perspective, we're looking strategically, initially, and trying to figure out what are our key high-level risks within the organization. Then we begin looking at risks around org structure. And do we have the organization structured the right way to execute and achieve our strategic objectives? As we begin flowing down, and we're looking at individual initiatives, we will look at things like, do we have appropriate alignment of initiatives to strategic objectives? How do we assess the impact of these risks and initiatives on the organization? So as we are looking at, again, this linkage to the very top of the organization and the strategic objectives, we're really trying to understand, do these initiatives align the right way? And what's really interesting, when I work with organization, it is really amazing how many times we will walk in and we will find that there are a lot of people that have their own agendas, yet this alignment in terms of what we're doing, how we're spending our resources, and whether or not that's really getting us to strategic objective achievement, how many times there are gaps within that linkage, if you will. So as we're proceeding through understanding how the organization is structured, what the strategic objectives are, we then get into more operational types of risks, which I've captured down here. So we drill into what are the key processes that support the functions, and are these processes effective? Again, are they supporting the strategic initiatives the right way? And are there issues that are causing underlying performance issues? At the bottom here, we get into the system side of the equation. So again, we are linking information technology into processes and our underlying functions that support the organization. So typically, what we're trying to do when we come into organizations, in some cases we will do all of this. We will look across the entire organization and try and make assessments to figure all of these different pieces out. Other times we will look at very specific components depending on the nature of what the organization needs and oftentimes where they're having issues. So this is a very interesting process. And again, the hook into accounting here is the fact that accounting really underlies all of this. So from a consulting perspective, if I don't understand how the numbers are being booked, how those numbers flow from an operational perspective into the financial statements, I cannot effectively really assess the risks across an organization using this type of framework. Does that make sense? Any questions on any of this? Is this relevant? You guys? Okay. So this is the space where I do a lot of work. And again, to do this the right way, it's very important that we have these fundamental understanding of accounting, technologies, processes, org structure, human capital, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that overlap, that interface, and that are correlated when you get into this type of analysis. And that's really what we try and do relative to helping organizations operate more effectively. So this is an example, and again, this is something that I pulled an excerpt from a deck that we're working with a company right now on that I thought did a good job of pulling together some of these concepts into more of a real life example, if you will. So in this case, with this client, they came to us and said, hey, we really need some help building out operational audit capability. And what they were looking for, was not so much let's go in and assess controls over a process, figure out if we're doing the books the right way, or if our financials are being accurately reported. But what they're more interested in was trying to figure out, are we operating efficiently, and how do we truly drive value into the organization? So there are 5 chevrons that you see here. The first begins with understanding objectives. The second gets into risk identification. The third is data assessment, systems assessment, and audit execution. So across each of these buckets, this is a pretty familiar flow that we use. When we go into organizations to really try and understand how effective they're managing risk in any capacity, we typically have steps similar to this, but this is tailored specifically to an operational audit look. So again, objectives definition. On the last slide, when I talked about going through and beginning with the strategy, understanding strategic objectives, this is a very similar concept where we are looking at a very concise area within an organization and trying to understand what we want to accomplish, and what is working well, where are there issues, and so forth. As we get into this risk identification space, what we are doing is we're taking some of those core objectives and we're beginning to really build out where we see risks across a very specific operational area. So in this case, we're actually looking at supply chain. We're looking at, they have an SAP system, so we're going and we're structuring a separate operational audit to look at some of their components of their SAP implementation. We're looking at vendor management and how effectively they manage vendors. And we are also structuring a project to look at their logistics function and how effectively they're moving product across global warehouses, essentially. So we have very, again, specific objectives in each of those spaces, and we begin bringing in these concepts around accounting, information technology, and risk management. So the way that we're doing this, when we go into any of these spaces, we begin by really looking at the process itself and trying to understand what is that process. What are the risks within that process? So from an accounting perspective, one of the things that we want to be able to do is, again, get a sense of how does, if we're looking at supply chain, how do they go through their vendor selection process when they are going out and purchasing raw materials for production? How does that move into the organization? How does that get booked? How is it recorded on the systems? Is that done efficiently, or are there areas that they could be generating efficiency or savings through doing those processes better? So again, this concept of let's understand the accounting and how that underlies the processes and technology, and really how are they doing? How do they do that the right way so that they're going to drive as much value to the bottom line? So the bullets you see here, we're looking at efficiency, systems, process risk, and operational level risks are all very relevant in terms of what we want to accomplish with this particular project. The next piece of what we're doing is this data assessment. So as I've mentioned previously, the importance of data today, as we're going into each of these areas, we are being very specific to not only understand the processes and the flow of information through each of these processes, we're trying to identify all the relevant data components. So that may be internal data, that may be external data. As an example from a supply chain, there are a lot of very relevant data concepts outside of the organization. So we need to understand the entire supply chain. If there's a supplier who subcontracts out a portion of what our organization is buying, that's a very relevant risk concept that we need to be aware of and understand and be able to think about relative to how it potentially impacts our organization. So we will actually do external data collection exercises where we will go out and sometimes we'll look at regional types of risks through various data that is available. Sometimes we will look at other types of data that are relevant externally. Internally, we have a lot of data that we also can use to assess risks within organizations. So as part of this effort, what we're doing is trying to understand, identify specific risks to these processes, tie data into it, and then figure out if we can better understand or more completely understand that risk today, and then subsequently, if we can potentially use that data going forward to monitor the risk more effectively. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with the data assessment. The systems assessment, in this case, this is an SAP shop. What we're looking at relative to these audits at this client is we are also going through and trying to figure out, are they using their systems the right way? So what that means is we are actually going in and looking at how they've configured the system for each of these audit areas, and we are trying to get a sense of have they configured it in a manner that is going to allow them to operate as efficiently as possible. So we do a lot of work in this space where we will go into organizations and assess their systems relative to how much return we can possibly and value we can bring into the organization by just changing configurations. So the way that this comes to being, oftentimes in today's day and age, every major organization is typically running a very large ERP system. When these systems are put in, there are a lot of people that are involved in this process, and there's a lot of demands and deadlines to get these systems built out the right way. So what occurs when these systems are put into organizations, oftentimes they're put in not with the perspective that we want to make sure that the organization is going to run as efficiently as possible. We just need to get this in to hit a deadline. So what we do as part of this type of audit process is we'll come in, we'll look at how that system was set up and figure out if it should have been set up better. And it's amazing the millions of dollars you can drive back into organizations by just looking at system configurations and potentially changing those configurations a certain way. So we spend a lot of time in this space. And then the last piece of this is the actual execution of these processes. So again, what you're seeing here is this is a very integrated approach. This requires a lot of specialized teams and a lot of very specialized areas of expertise. So we're bringing in accounting, very good process understanding, and we're bringing in process optimization and efficiency expertise. We're bringing in systems, in this case SAP expertise, and we're also bringing along our data analytics team to really look at the data. So this is what we do in organizations and how we are bringing different types of solutions, using a lot of different types of skill sets. Questions? Make sense? Okay. So how does this translate into what we're looking for relative to students and really what you are on the forefront of developing in terms of your day-to-day responsibilities? I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about my team specifically to give you a sense of really what I have on my team. So the first several bullets there kind of capture the majors that are relevant in terms of the team that I work with day in and day out. So accounting majors, I have some of my team that are pure accounting. I have a number of double majors, so accounting and information technology. I've got a couple team members that have that. I've got information technology and marketing, information technology and finance. So, why do I have this specific collection of skill sets, and what's most valuable to me? By far, the most valuable skill set that I'm looking for, or the most valuable major combination, is accounting and IT. So if I've got someone that has that skill set, I know that they're going to be able to move between both the process side of what I do and the technology side. I know that they're going to have a fundamental understanding of how information flows through the financial statements and how to take that back to relevant processes. If they have a good IT background, I know that they're going to be able to lift that working knowledge in terms of how you need to book certain things and take those back to specific systems and assess whether or not the systems are configured the right way to ensure that those processes are working effectively. So my favorite and what I look for first and foremost is accounting and IT. And then in terms of some of these other types of majors, I look for a lot of different perspectives relative to my team. So finance is a good example of that. I spend a lot of time working with CFOs, chief accounting officers. There is a very much of a finance angle in everything that I do. I mentioned the concepts wrapped around return on investment. We look at things like cost of compliance. And so for me to go into an organization and actually sell a project, I need to be able to very succinctly articulate, here is the risk that your organization has, or an issue that is causing a problem. And by allowing me to help you out, I'm going to be able to bring X amount of return into the organization. Or you have a significant compliance issue here, and if that compliance risk is realized, it's going to cost you a lot more money than it is for us to come in and help you, put the right framework in place to manage it effectively. So I like finance. Marketing is kind of an interesting one because I don't do a ton in the marketing space, but what I look for is creativity in terms of the skill sets that I'm hiring. So when I've got individuals in front of me, and I'm assessing them, in terms of are they going to be a good fit, what I do on a day-to-day basis is develop solutions, and it's not cookie cutter. I can't come in and drop down a checklist and say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're done. What I do is, I come into oftentimes large organizations, complex, difficult issues that need to be resolved, and we need to develop a creative solution to make that work. So this concept around creativity is really, really important in terms of being able to do that effectively. So when I see someone with, marketing major, or I won't hire probably exclusively marketing, but when I see marketing and IT, that's an interesting combination to me. And it helps bring a very different perspective and different level of creative angle, if you will, relative to solution development. So these are the things that that I look for in terms of the campus hires that I make, and we're obviously trying to get the best people we can within those different majors to come in and be a part of our team and help us out. So how does that translate into skill sets? So the first bullet there, business understanding. And there's no better way to gain business understanding than with accounting, hands down. Most of the experienced hires that we do, they all have an accounting background. Most of them have been through audit and have different experiences that have allowed them to gain business perspectives. So from a risk management side, if I can't come in and very quickly gain an understanding of a business process, of an organizational structure, or how an organization operates, I'm not going to be in a position where I can very effectively develop a solution or identify risks that are going to be relevant to that client. So part of what I'm looking for is how effectively can an individual really understand a business and then begin applying it in terms of the risk perspective that that we take. And so there's, like I said, there's no better area than accounting to be pretty well comfortable that an individual is going to be able to do that effectively. Systems and IT. So on the previous slides, obviously we talked about a lot about the systems interface and how that is something that's very critical, and having to think of both this business understanding and the information technology side as an integrated type of thought versus siloed execution. Having that understanding of systems and IT is really, really important. And then the last two bullets get to the data aspect of this. When I'm hiring, even off campus, I am doing a lot of inquiry around how effectively do students understand some of these data concepts, and do they know how to use some very basic data tools, things like Microsoft Access, how effectively can they use Excel, what I'm trying to really evaluate is, can these students come in, and if I give them, even in whatever their small part of a project may be, can I give them data, and can they analyze it for me, and can they really potentially develop those skills to be data-centric as they go forward in the right way relative to how we need to serve clients from a data perspective. So what I find today, there are certain schools that do this better than others, and so I know certain schools that when I'm talking to students, they're going to have some of these skill sets that are going to be pretty well developed, and that gives them an edge relative to potentially getting hired by me. So that's kind of a sense of the majors I look for, the key skill sets, and then the last thing here, I say, why accounting? And without question, accounting provides the most comprehensive understanding from a business perspective that you're going to get coming out of any major within any university setting. The other real benefit here is just the rigor around accounting instills the types of values that I look for relative to what we have to do. So on a day-to-day basis, we're involved in a pretty high-stress environment. So we are working multiple clients, multiple projects. We have deadlines. As I said earlier, these are usually pretty complex projects, and we put in a fair amount of hours to execute the right way and make sure we deliver the right types of solutions. So what comes with that is there are a lot of pressures and stresses on us to execute at a high level, do that in compressed time frames, and work some hours to get that done. And so what I see from an accounting perspective, the accounting programs typically drive that rigor, and we'll go through a weeding out process, if you will, where we will usually land on students that are going to be well equipped to operate in this space. So this is what I look for relative to skill sets, types of individuals that we're interested in, and how we, from a risk management perspective, execute and interface into accounting, IT, and data. Yeah, so like Marquette, I think really does. Marquette's interesting because they have an information technology double major option that allows students to not go full-fledged into the typical IT major, but gives them a great background relative to understanding fundamental concepts around information and technology, data, and what I'm seeing a lot out of Marquette right now is they're pairing these students, with these double majors you see up there. They do a great job of pairing some of that. Other schools have a more rigorous information technology major that doesn't allow students to get the level of exposure that Marquette provides and pair it with an accounting major to develop those skill sets, but not require you to be fully immersed into like an IT type of program. The other thing that I see, like with the Marquette students in particular, is they have very good access skills. So everybody I'm bringing off of Marquette, when I go in and put a solution together at a client, we will use data throughout that solution. So as an example, I actually have a client on the other side of town here that we've done a pretty large project, and we've gone in and looked at their all of their processes, looked at risks within those processes, controls, and done an assessment relative to how effectively they're mitigating risk at an operational level. As part of that process, we take all of our information and we build that and put it into a database that then allows us to run metrics off of the types of risks we're seeing, the types of gaps we're seeing relative to controls, and a whole series of other analytics around the types of controls, whether they're monitoring or transactional in nature, automated, those types of things that we can give clients very interesting risk profile perspectives relative to just the data and composition of different risks and different controls. And so even my first year staff, if they can come in and they understand how to use an Access database effectively, I can put them on a project and I can say, okay, you're gonna take the data from this project and I'm gonna have you manage it. And so that's exactly what I do. So if a student is coming out and doesn't understand some of those fundamental concepts in terms of how to do that, they're gonna be at a real disadvantage. From there, I also know that if a student has that good foundation, there is a lot of upside relative to moving into some of the more complex data types of things that we do. And as an example of that, we have a client that we're working on right now where we are looking at their strategic risks and we are trying to map data into those strategic risks and develop predictive modeling capability. So we actually have data scientists as part of our organization, and what we'll do is use data at very high levels through very sophisticated tools to assess whether or not we can actually get into some predictive or profiling capability in terms of understanding risk and monitoring it. So that's why that's important. Yeah, so fundamentally, the Microsoft Office products is where you start. And then within our organization, in terms of the data analytics side, Tableau is a great tool, and we do a lot of build out in Tableau as we get into some of the more advanced analytics things that we do. Our data analytics center of excellence actually has a custom platform that we built out that allows us, to go into organizations, and it's not as easy as plugging in, but basically plug into your system and run a series of analytics that populate into pre-canned dashboards. So we have custom-based solutions that we do in Tableau. On every one of my projects, minimally I'll use Access. Excel being pretty much all of our staff now goes through advanced Excel training. So those are really, really important skill sets to have. Being able to navigate through the Microsoft Office effectively is absolutely critical for what it is we do. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a big discrepancy out there. And I actually went and spent some time with an accounting information systems class at an institution, and we were talking a little bit about some of the skill sets that are required, and a lot of these things, the programs aren't structured to develop these skill sets, and so they have opportunities to. If you're a self-motivated self-starter, if you want to go and do some of the stuff on your own, they have that. But the reality is, I mean, how many students, when you've got the demands of your class schedule, are going to use their free time to go and learn Excel? And so there's a big discrepancy in terms of, the level of skill around these tools. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything that allows you, and Access is the database that we use. Understanding how to use data, how to manage data very efficiently is, those are important skill sets. So when we get into bigger data types of things, we'll get into SQL solutions, and there are other tools that we will incorporate in it. But having fundamental database skill sets, so if it's not Access, there are other databases out there, but we use Access. So, the millennials, the Millennial Question. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No. It is a different world today. It's interesting because when I came out of school, so I joined Cooper's and Library, which is now PwC, and I was on the audit side, and I tell you, it was pound you relentlessly your first year was the mentality, and I mean, it was work 80, 100 hours during busy season, and you're expected to perform and keep your mouth shut, and you're there very early and you're there very late, day in and day out, and that's what it was. That is not the world today. It is a much softer world. The millennials that come in, they have a different perspective, and I don't think when I came out of college and my first experiences were ideal. I mean, it drove a lot of people out, and so that wasn't a good thing. But I think there certainly is this mentality that's different today where, I don't know if it's more lackadaisical is how I think of it, but you either have to realize that you need to perform at a certain standard and you need to get, I personally don't care what type of schedule anyone wants to hold. I pretty much manage by get it done on time, and get it done well, or you're going to have an issue. So if you have a certain style that you want to embrace that's different potentially than mine, I'm okay with that. But if you don't deliver, then that's going to be a problem. And so that's sort of how we handle it. Our organization, interestingly enough, had a huge culture shift about 3 years ago. So within public accounting, there are very, turnover is an issue. It's something that has to be managed the right way. Our turnover rate annually was roughly around 25% about 3 years ago. And so, there's good turnover where if we don't, have people performing at the right level, then, they need to find something else. But when we're losing quality people, and within that 25%, we really felt like we were losing too many quality people. And a lot of that, again, is because of the rigors it requires to be in this profession. But what we did is we went through this whole culture transformation where we really began to take a look at, as an organization, how and what we were doing relative to treating people the right way. And so we made some very significant changes, everything from how we execute our performance management program through how we initiate things as simple as everyday meetings. So when we have any sort of team meeting, any sort of firm-wide meeting, it always starts with a culture conversation. We have a culture training that everyone that walks into our organization goes through. It's called unfreezing. So we've done a lot of things to really accommodate that specific need of how the world has changed and different perspectives that groups like the Millennials are bringing. And I think it's good. Ironically, our turnover dropped like 7 points. So we went from 25% to 18, and all of a sudden we had issues because now we're overstaffed because we didn't anticipate it falling that much. So we're still trying to right-size it. Oh yeah, yeah. So we have a whole team that's dedicated to cloud. So within our organization, we have specialized groups that do a lot of different types of pieces. So if I go back, let me go back up here. So our cloud-based team is over in business consulting and technology. So we have a whole team that gets into information technology strategy. We have an Oracle implementation team that resides here. We have a cloud-based team that looks at this. Even with what I do, I actually do quite a bit of work within SAP. So I spend a lot of my time working in manufacturing in particular. 80% of the manufacturers run SAP. And so I do a lot of work in the SAP space. And SAP right now is moving to a whole new platform that is essentially a cloud-based platform. Oracle's actually out in front of that a little bit more than SAP is. But even when I do, I'm getting pulled into cloud-based discussions relative to the systems that we work on. But yes, cloud is that's the direction that everybody's going. It's kind of changing the IT landscape a bit. As a result of that, we have very specialized areas of expertise to deal with that.
So do you see yourself?
I would say we have to accommodate to wherever the market goes. So as the world changes, if we don't keep up with that, and one of the kind of critical things that we look at as an organization and how we try to align ourselves is being very innovative. So as we're looking at whether it's this Google world, we have to understand that, and we have to understand how clients are using that, and then once we understand that, then we develop solutions or approaches or methodologies that can help them in terms of what they potentially want to do, or from my perspective, what are the risks associated with that, and how do we deal with it. So so the answer is yes, but we really are aligned, and we watch very closely in terms of how our markets, how our clients, and how the world is changing. Something that's interesting, and are we okay on time? Okay. Something that's interesting, we do some neat things as a firm relative to education, particularly at the partner level. So we have a number of advisory conferences that I go to, and our firm brings in some pretty interesting individuals as part of those events. And we had one a couple months ago out in Las Vegas, and at that conference, there was an individual who spoke by the name of Mike Walsh, and his official title is a futurist. And so it was funny, we're sitting there and we're like, wow, what's this guy going to be? But he was a really, really interesting speaker. What he does is he goes around and talks to organizations, and he asks senior level executives kind of where they see markets going, where they see their organization going. And he specifically focused in on the use of algorithms and how, as we go forward, the use of algorithms is going to explode. So when we talk about data, information technology, and you begin taking all of that information and building it into models that are going to be used across a lot of different types of areas that have never seen this before. So from an audit perspective, where we're impacted, or from a tax perspective, is the use of bots or not physical robots doing work, but it's how do we automate putting a tax return together? How do we automate fundamental audit processes? That's being done by using data and by using algorithms to execute. At that conference, Mike specifically talked about Amazon. And I mean, you look at how Amazon has developed, and the fact that Amazon is Amazon is creating marketplaces, stores where you don't have to go in and spend any money. It does the recognition types of things, and even in the big warehouse or in their distribution centers, what they're doing before you place an order, they're anticipating what the order is that you're going to place, and they have it ready to go so that when your order comes in, they can ship it. And I mean, it's fascinating how Amazon is using algorithms to try and understand all of our buying habits and anticipate what it is we're going to buy and have that ready for us before the order is even received. So that concept is, we're applying that today. We're building out our technologies, and all the major firms are doing the same thing. It's going to be a very different world. 10 years from now, I'm excited to see where it goes, because from our perspective, it gives us a different avenue to generate stronger margins by having, once we have a bot in place where we don't need a human equivalent and it's built out, that's a sunk cost that now once we've spent the money, you get 100% margin flow through going forward. So from a business perspective, from a firm perspective, if we could do every project like that, we'd do it. But the reality is that's going to shift. There'll be a fundamental shift in how students have to, the skills that they need and how they have to be equipped going forward. So it means that this linkage into technology, you may not have a student that comes out and has to do the same sort of things that I had to do when I came out of school. It's very unlikely. You have to have a fundamental understanding of how that works, but you need to apply those skills differently, and you need to be able to really understand the data components and maybe how to build an algorithm to execute a process or apply an accounting principle. You bet. That's huge. So we have a cyber team that specializes in that, that specific area. So as data becomes more and more relied upon, critical, and being used more extensively, the risk around cyber increases exponentially. And this is something that we spend a lot of time, and companies are investing a lot of money now to try and understand and manage that risk effectively. And if you don't, I mean, you see, every other day there's another story hitting the papers about a significant breach. And so that's a space that is going to be very, very not only relevant, but it's going to increase in importance. And I think we've got, the next topic I think gets into that a little bit more. So so you'll hear a little bit more about that coming up. But again, all these concepts around data management, how we use data, and how it, again, thinking of this very integrated and how it ties back into the accounting space, it's all going to be front and center going forward. Okay. All right. Thanks again.